Praise be Jesus and Mary.
Now and forever.
Today we're continuing our look at Franciscan spirituality. Last time we spoke about the ascetical and the mystical aspects of spiritual growth. These are considered the two aspects of the interior life which are complementary, but in general they have a ray of extension that's vaster and more complete than what's usually understood. The ascetical part, which Franciscans encapsulate in the exercise of absolute poverty, meaning detachment from all created things, from persons, from ourselves, from our own selfishness. The ascetical part accompanies us from the beginning of our spiritual life to what's called the transformative union. But even in that transformative union, the soul continues to be active in some way, according to Franciscans. The mystical path, which is centered on charity, embraces the whole life of grace, from the dismantling of the old man, which began at baptism, to the progressive reclothing in virtue, all the way up to the perfect union with God. The mystical isn't limited to the more or less transitory moment of infused contemplation. No, it extends from the instant that grace takes the helm of our soul to every action completed by the animating breath of the Holy Spirit. And it works through all of that in varying degrees and intensities. It's important to know that the role of our human will isn't diminished at all in God's work of sanctification. Quite the opposite, actually. Franciscan spirituality, with its voluntaristic approach, and we say voluntarism in a good sense, not in an exaggerated form, like William of Ockham did. Franciscan spirituality works on strengthening the will to the maximum. Our spirituality engages the will from the first moment of grace till our last moment in corresponding with God's grace. It's a correspondence and a collaboration between us and God that's vigilant, that's active, that's prompt, it's faithful, and requires all of our natural energies to be put into action and be governed by the operations of grace. God calls us to be governed by grace, to be governed by the Spirit, more so than by the law, as St. Paul himself would attest. Every person of good will which walks the path of perfection must know that the effort and the struggle to remove obstacles in our spiritual life will be necessary up to the last moment of life. From the beginning, we have to try to avail ourselves of the inspirations of divine grace. We have to be open to God's grace and His inspirations, and those inspirations will become more sensible and more powerful as we grow spiritually. They become so powerful that they eventually absorb the soul and transform it if we're faithful to those leadings of grace. In general, as well, as the Franciscan soul will try to avoid the question, which can be a pretentious one. The question is, at what point am I in the spiritual life? It's a question that only God can sufficiently answer. Whatever response we give to that question runs the risk of making us discouraged on the one hand, or making us proud. So it's best to not focus on that. So we don't try to worry exactly about where we are and what spiritual mansion we're at right now. We have to be familiar with the different mansions or the different phases of the spiritual life, but we don't have to be fixated on getting a precise Google Maps location of where I am in the castle. Not necessary. Just continue to go forward spiritually. So those two aspects of the spiritual life, the ascetical and the mystical, always coexist together, even though they exist together in different proportions, depending on where we are in our spiritual spectrum. The ascetical and the mystical are not two successive paths or two paths which exclude each other. And what's more, the constant element in both of them, which is God's grace, is present from the beginning. And from the beginning, it has a directive form, even if it's a hidden form. From the beginning, God's grace is acting like a magnet, working to draw you closer and closer to the Lord. As one Franciscan spiritual author says, he says, the spiritual life is the unwinding or the blossoming of the divine life in us. And the divine life cannot be subdivided, put into little compartments. So the ascetical part, the human effort part, is subordinate. It's secondary, even though it is necessary. The whole spiritual life is substantially the development and the flowering of grace, which is charity. Grace, which is the celestial seed planted in us in baptism, that will fully blossom in the glory of the life to come. So let's ask Our Lady today for the grace to simply continue going forward in the spiritual life, for the grace to continue to be drawn closer to her Immaculate Heart and to the Sacred Heart of her Son. Praise be Jesus and Mary, now and forever.